Tim, what is it about these bugs in a box?
There's no way to shrink it down. There's no words that can describe it. They bring a healing. You either know or you have to know. The smell of a healthy hive, once you smell it, you'll never forget it. But just the ability to get up, take your health in your own hands. See, that's what we have to do. The desire to work these bees and the healing you get from it. It's something about a box full of bugs, you know what I'm saying? It's got a healing to it.
Mike, what is it about those bugs in a box?
Wow, those bugs in a box. There's something about them. It's an insect that can do so much, so many functions it has, so many things it has within itself, and we get to manipulate it. God allowed us to manipulate His creation and do the things we can do. We can make products from it, and it's just exciting to sit there and be able to propagate them and manipulate them and watch them do their thing and explode on you and watch the direct results of what you do. To me, it's nothing like it. It's like almost an addiction when you get to do this and you have this ability given to you to do this. So to me, that's what they are. They're just amazing, amazing insects.
Randy, what is it about those bugs in a box?
There's just something magical about those bugs in a box. I don't know a whole lot of beekeepers that don't have a watching chair or some way to sit out and just watch their bees. You just watch them work. It's just something, it's like watching a campfire. It's like sitting around at midnight watching a campfire. You're out there by yourself and it's quiet. But I do the same thing with my bees. They don't know all there is to know. I'll never know all there is to know, but there's so much to learn. It's all so interesting, and it brings together a community, whether in the way we're doing it with YouTube and with other things. It brings together a community of like-minded people that are, we're all a little off, kind of. It's relaxing, it's fun, and I'll be doing it from now on, just like you, I'm sure.
Bruce, what is it about those bugs in a box?
Man, I don't know. It's addictive from the day I first opened one up. It's therapeutic to me. It's always an adventure, and I just never know what to expect, and it's just very miraculous to me how they do what they do, and I don't know what it is. It's just something. There's an it about it that is just addicting that I just love, and I guess it's a way to interact fully with nature, and it's like opening a gift. Every time you open one, you never know what you're going to expect. It's a surprise, and so many things to learn, so many things to do, and so many things you can do with it, and I just love it. If you ever doubt that there's a God, just open a beehive and look at the bees, because there's just no way that just happened randomly. There's definitely something divine about that, and I just love it.
What is it about these bugs in a box that keeps us coming back, that keeps us working them in the rain, traveling across the country?
In the heat?
And the heat, the snow, the rain.
Snow?
The snow. That's a long story, right, Tim? Oh. There is just something about the bees, and I think the bees are just the conduit to people. Bees are a conduit to a connection that's way greater than ourselves. We can't fully understand what it is, but we're drawn to it. As we've heard folks talk about, there's a healing with the bees, mental, physical, spiritual. It ties people together, makes those connections, it brings us all together, it fulfills a part of us, that the result of engaging with the bees, the result of that action, the consequence of that action is joy and happiness. What is it exactly about those bees? I don't think I'll ever know, but I think I'll spend all my days trying to find out. Well, hey, Brian, how's it going?
Wow. Greg Burns. How are you, buddy?
Oh, pretty good. Just, I think everyone's chomping at the bit to figure out where in the world are they for winter? Are they close? Are their bees going to make it? What can they do? It's that time of year, Brian. What are you up to?
Mm, trying to figure that all out.
Every single year we try to figure that out, don't we? We try to remember what it was that we were trying to not forget last year to try to do this year to put all those strategies and plans and things in place and learn and try to get those bees in a even better place and then try to keep just pushing forward year after year. And
Yeah.
most of the time I think we learn, and then sometimes there's just so many variables that sometimes kind of hard to sort through all that, isn't it?
Yeah. It doesn't help that a couple things I'm thinking of this year. My normal winterization, I was one that, everybody sees. I throw the wraps on my hives and I do this and that. But you break into double digits, and I've got 11 colonies now. And do I go through and wrap and do that? So I've decided, no, I'm not going to.
Mm.
But, then I'm thinking, well, do I do the insulated top on them? So I still haven't figured out exactly what I'm doing yet. I know that,
Yeah,
we're getting close, but
yeah,
I think things right now they're par for the course. They're running through what they should be doing. Our the weather is tapering down for the year. I think at least up here in my neck of the woods, our days in the 70s are done.
yeah.
So they're hammering the feed and getting their weight where it should be for the winter. So yeah, but I hate to see the season come to an end, but it's been a great year.
Yeah, it's
So
been the year of the rabbit. I can remember early in the year
um,
thinking, man, why is everything just going so good? Everything is on so heavy, and everything seems to be abundant. And I actually parked the tractor right in the middle of the ridge, and I'm just sitting there, just looking around, thinking about it. And literally, it's just rabbits jumping right out in front of me, just like a sign, just to let you know, hey, this is the year of the rabbit. This is the year of abundance. And of course, even when you think you're doing everything right and weather is cooperating, sometimes you can be humbled by either a poor choice or a
oh
catastrophic
yeah,
weather event, and then you just have to pick up the pieces and keep moving along, keep learning. But it can definitely be, raising bees is definitely there's a learning curve to it. And I think
yeah,
in each part of the country you've got different sets of circumstances that make it challenging for you at different parts of the year.
yep,
Me and you, of course, are in Ohio. Our buddy Bruce, who is he's got the night off tonight. He is visiting with some grandbabies and some family, and so Bruce, have fun tonight. Um, it's fun to be able to spend that really important time when you do have family in to do all those kind of things.
yeah,
So, but it's always fun to hear Bruce rub in about how Alabama is, Alabama winners, compared to Ohio. We all do things differently, I think, which is cool.
mm,
And there's we're going to get into it tonight. There's a lot. There's always, you'll hear us say over and over and over again, there is more than one way to pluck the chicken. What matters is knowing how you're going to eat it. That's going to dictate how you pluck that chicken. And if you've never plucked the chicken, maybe you don't even know what that means, but believe it or not, there's more than one way to do that, just like there is to do anything. But
yep,
understanding the context, the scale that you're working in, and your goals dictates all the things that you do leading up to the end of the year, and then also through that end of the year periods to kind of set you up for the springtime. And we all do that differently. And I
mm,
think one of the fun things about educating folks, working with them, mentoring, is being crystal clear in the fact that just because we do something a certain way doesn't mean that you have to. But here's what we do. Here is the why we do this. Now let's learn how and if that actually makes sense for you and what your goals are. And so that can be really complicated. I'm really excited about tonight's guest because it's always fun to bring in another voice, another opinion, and especially when it's from a a master beekeeper, someone who writes for bee culture.
Wow.
What else? Long list of credentials. A seamstress,
Wow.
obviously a beekeeper, a Franklin County uh, bee inspector,
That's
um,
awesome.
and she's the owner and operator of Ohio Queen Bee. It is absolutely an honor tonight to bring into this conversation Miss Nina Bagley.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hey Nina, how's it going?
It's going real well. Thank you.
You getting ready for winter?
My bees are ready. They're all ready. I have
That's
them.
awesome.
Yep, they're heavy. I've pushed them down, and I started getting them ready in July. People don't realize,
Yeah.
you know, that's when you really should start getting them ready and getting them healthy and ready for October. So
Right. Well, I'm
Yeah.
sure we're going to dig into all that tonight. Nina, for folks who hadn't had the opportunity yet to get to know you yet, tell everyone who Nina Bagley is.
well, I'm Nina Bagley. I started bees 20 years ago, and I got into the queens, and I like to teach. So I take care of the parks in my area, the State House, Franklin Park, and I hold classes, and I just give back to the bee people so that we can all be on the same page in what we're doing and help one another. We need the bees. They're very important. So I do a lot. I don't want to brag about myself, but I stay in my lane and I just do what I can do.
Well, you've got to see a lot of different scenarios. You've got to see a lot of different folks work through their experience, try to work through what their goals are for their bee yards, what it is about those bugs in a box that are bringing them to this experience of beekeeping. I know you've done a lot of hands-on mentoring. You've been a lighthouse for a lot of folks, getting them off to a good start just to help see them do better, do well by the bees. This time of year, like you just mentioned, we try to preach that religiously. You know, we're getting ready for winter in July, and the things that we do from July moving forward can really dictate the size and the health and the overall essence of a colony as it goes into the fall, what it can withstand through the fall as it builds and gets ready for wintertime. So I thought tonight, Nina, maybe we could start to open up that conversation of overwintering strategies. And I think that's going to be a little different for everybody, whether you've got 1 or 2 hives in the backyard, if you've got 10 or 20, or you're an aspiring sideliner, or if you're a sideliner growing into commercial. We're all going to treat that a little bit differently based on our context, our goals, and also how much time and effort we have to put into each one of those systems there. So Nina, you've been beekeeping for a while now. Maybe we could start with what are the most memorable hard lessons learned trying to overwinter bees in Ohio?
Oh, there's several. Thinking I don't have mites because I didn't see them, and the bees looked great. Ventilation, too much moisture in the hive, not feeding them enough, not understanding the weight of my hive, and really not understanding the biology and how the bees how they work. Once I got the hang of that, then it gets easier. But I would lose hives, and then I figured it out. Requeening is important. I requeen so that I have a good queen going into the winter. I just tell everybody it's an art. What I do works for me. It might not work for you. I think you just have to keep at it until a light bulb goes off like it did for me. And I'm like, great. I understand the moisture. The wind is hard on them. So I like tarping them and protecting them the best I can and doing whatever I can. But sometimes you can do a lot, but it's genetics too. So it's yeah.
There's a lot going on there, isn't there? All at
Yeah.
one time. You have to try to. Do you think that's one of the greatest challenges beginning beekeepers have, is trying to sort through all of those nuances all at once to put together a good strategy to make sure their bees are alive coming out of the spring?
I do. And I think we get our bees and we don't understand the mites when we first get them. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the new beekeeper understands that. And then it's too late when they figure it out. They have PMS, or they've got hive beetles and so many other variables. So I'm finding that out now with a lot of the newer beekeepers when I go do inspections right now, that their hives are really light and there's not a lot of bees in there. But to them, they think there's a lot of bees and that's a healthy looking hive, because I don't think they've ever seen a really good hive or experienced hives making it over the winter 3 or 4 times, years. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
they don't understand, and then the bees die and they start over again and they do the same thing again instead of trying to figure out what went wrong and why they died.
It's hard sometimes to, I think we've all been guilty of it. I know in one of our presentations that we give, I talk about going to the beekeeping buffet, and I'm literally putting a little of this and that and that, and I'm taking all the things that look and sound that I think would taste good, put that on my plate, and then I try to do all those things all at once with the beekeeping. And for years, I couldn't keep the bees alive. I had all of these compounding factors that weren't interlocked, they weren't meshing, but individually they sounded good, but they didn't have a place to fit within each other. And you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until finally, for me, it was a massive ego check, and the bees have been the greatest humbler I've ever known, because no matter what you think, if you think you're doing everything right, you will know as soon as those maples bloom, you'll have your answer. And for a long time, it took a while to understand that, hey, maybe I'm not, maybe I could be doing better. Maybe all these things that I think or I wanted to believe was working, maybe they're not. Now what do we do? Brian, I know you've been on a journey too. Do you have any, what was your hardest lesson learned as you learned to keep your bees alive through the winter?
That right there, keeping them alive. I think the hardest moment for me, the moment that just jumps right out. I mean, I'll never forget it, but it's when I transitioned my treatments over to using a new product. I didn't fully research that product and did not treat for mites like I should have, and lost every one of my colonies in the winter.
Mm.
And that was that moment, it takes you right back down and you start from scratch again. I basically used that moment though as a learning moment. What did I do wrong? Let's take a step back. Let's look at what happened. What can I do better moving forward to keep my colonies alive? And it's been a little bit of a journey since then. That's been 2 years ago when that happened. I had all of last year, all of this year. Got some new strategies, and my colonies now, I'm going to knock on wood. I'm going to, do whatever, because I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not, out of that danger zone just yet, because whenever you just kind of get comfortable, one of those moments is going to pop up. We thought we were having this fantastic year this year, and then look what happened to you. It's, in beekeeping, you're always throwing those curveballs, and, you always have to be prepared. I've learned to be a beekeeper instead of the bee haver. In my new, somewhat plan for beekeeping, I've included, the proper nutrition. I've fed, I've supplemented, changed up my treatment strategies and everything like that. So I've learned a lot, but it all, I'm almost happy that I lost all my colonies 2 years ago, because had that not occurred, I wouldn't have done the research that I did. I wouldn't have changed my strategies, and I wouldn't have the strong colonies that I do now. So, but it's that, man, when I lost all those colonies, that was that moment where I really had to step back and evaluate what I did and, move forward. So
I think it almost takes us losing everything at least once or twice before you really, it really sinks in. Nina, I'm not going to answer for you, but have you been in that position?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It breaks your heart when you go in and you see that they got wet, and I could have prevented that. And Or
Yeah.
they starved when I thought maybe they had food. Yeah, and the only thing I think it does is it teaches me to understand what I did wrong and to have a backup plan and start making nukes up and having my own resources. So then when I do lose it, I'm self-sufficient and I can be sustainable. Because it ruins your day.
Yeah.
And yeah, it breaks your heart.
Yeah.
I think it takes a little while for us all to get to that point to be receptive to, and then it's okay. So now we get there, our bees are dead. We're okay with just acknowledging that. Okay, maybe we don't have this all figured out. Okay, now what? You almost have to get to that point. I think we've all seen, and I always butcher the name. What's the Dunninger Kruger curve? Yeah, that's it. The Dunninger Kruger curve, where you're as a beekeeper, you know it all. Here you are, year 2 or year 3 on top of the mountain, just rejoicing from the hilltops that you have got it figured out, and you want the whole world to. Oh, I've got a company here. What are you doing? Well, here's Izzy. Here's our social media manager. Say hi, Izzy. She's also
Hi.
brought me something to drink. What are you doing with? Are you doing the? She must be doing something with the TikToks. Is that okay?
I was just going to
She's
say,
doing
is she going to put me back on the tick?
I think Brian, she's putting you back on the tick there.
Oh.
So I guess if you haven't seen what that's all about, we've been Izzy's been busy keeping us relevant with all these with the kids these days, I guess, with the TikToks and the Instagrams and all that. So she's been taking footage and putting some funny stuff to it and some music. So I guess for everyone watching right now, I guess check out our TikTok. When are you gonna do this one?
This one will probably come out tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So check out tomorrow's TikTok on Nature's Image Farm and Instagram and all the places, and you'll see yourself looking at a video camera being recorded by a video camera being seen by all the videos.
It's fun. It is fun.
Thanks, Iz. We'll see you. Well, you got to have fun with. You can't. You can't take everything too seriously all the time. I think some folks. We get a lot of constructive criticism and feedback, and I enjoy it. Some folks are like, okay, can you have more jokes? And some folks are like, can you just have nothing but scientific beekeeping talk? And I'm like, hey, that's not us. But
yeah.
But well, anyways, as folks try to put together their strategies, I think what I'm hearing Nina, you say, and Brian, and I know from my own experience, it wasn't until I really got a good grip on the mites before our bees really started overwintering well. We would have certain years, of course, that might have been better or worse, and that can all kind of change. But we can overwinter in something as small as one single 5-frame medium box if the bees are healthy.
Yeah.
And you can have a box that's double deeps or triples, or you stack it however high you want. If they're not healthy, they're definitely going to have some trouble. And I think all the things that we do, whether it's wrapping, whether it's tar paper, insulated wraps, some of those cool Ohio Queen Bee hand-stitched wraps, there's all kinds of different things that you can do that I think they're buffers. They're buffers to the stressors that are on that colony. And I'll tell you one last story here, and we'll keep the conversation moving. But I might have mentioned it a little while ago. Is I can remember getting to that point this time of year. This time of year for most farmers and beekeepers, you get to the point to where when fall comes, that burnout is real, and you're looking right down that smoking barrel, and that you can't quit. You still got to dig in. There's a lot left to do, but you are just spent. You're wore out. You're tired. You're burnout. You're just. And I can remember one year I'm sitting here years ago when we were still selling NUCS off from the side of the house, and as we were growing the apiary, I can remember sitting there in my thinking chair and looking up at this big, majestic white oak, and I'm trying to figure out what do I do? I was accepting the fact that I hadn't done what I needed to all year. Now, what do I try to do right now, all of a sudden, to try to make it right? And I asked the question. I put it out there. And then what I heard was there's nothing that you're going to do now to make up for what you haven't did or done then. And it hit me, right? And so one aspect is it's relieving. It puts me off the hook because
Yeah.
there is no magic wand that I can
No.
magically wave right now to get these bees through the winter if they aren't already there or
No.
close. There's nothing you can. What are you gonna do?
No.
So
No.
here I am, right? And I'm trying to acknowledge that thought, and it wasn't until years later before it really sunk in. Here I am throwing everything at these colonies. I'm building every quilt box, and they've got windbreaks, and they've got wraps, and they've got insulation, and they've got this, and I've got all these NUCS clustered together, and I've got my FLIR camera out there looking, and I'm checking, are they doing this? Are they doing that? And like 90% of them died that year.
Oh.
Well, to me that was still a win, because all the bees that could survive me and my neglect end up being the foundation stock of our queens. They were the ones that year after year after year kept hanging on, kept hanging on, kept hanging on. So there was still a net positive to it, but it wasn't really until then where the light bulb went off and it said, hey man, there's nothing you're going to do. For folks listening right now, if you are unsure if you did right by the bees, if you are unsure what those mite counts were, if you don't know the healthier colonies right now, I mean this lovingly. There's as the kids would say, let it go, because those colonies very likely are not in the best condition, and their percentage, their chances of survival might be pretty low.
Right.
What can we do about it? We can learn from it. We can get the feedback. We can get the information from it and move forward. So Nina, we mentioned mites. That's obviously, we got to have you back maybe a couple times a year and dig into these individual components, because we love talking about mites and what to do about it. And we can certainly go down that rabbit hole another time, but that would be a many hour conversation. For all those who are on the Instagram and the TikTok, Brian was just out to the farm and we were having fun putting on Apigard, and me and Brian, I guess we even did a dance on top of a pallet hives. Izzy taught us a dance, and she said,
Well,
all right, grandpas, you guys get up there and dance on top of these bees.
the only thing that I'll say though is if you do dance on top of a beehive, if you miss a certain step, there's someone here that will push you off the hives. So I wasn't quite, my choreography didn't hit. So I got just shoved off the hive and,
Well, you'll have that. We had fun though, didn't we?
Oh yeah, that was good. Good
Nina,
time.
you mentioned you start getting everything ready in July. Can you briefly run us through your strategy starting in July to start getting those bees ready for the wintertime?
Yeah, this just works for me. I don't know if it works for everyone. Can you hear me?
You sound great.
Okay. I take my honey off, and then I just start letting them bring in what they can. And if they need food when we go through the dearth, I feed them. And then I wait till the goldenrod comes in. I push the bees down. If they're 4 or 5 high and they're empty frames on the top, I get rid of those because of it just draws hive beetles. So I want to push them down into 3 or 2 deeps and just pack them down in there. And I've usually been very successful that way. And keeping the wind off of them, pushing them together, like you said. I've even brought NUCS in the house before and put them in the front room. You do almost whatever you can to get them through the winter. But yeah, just feeding them and making sure they're strong and healthy. And I've treated for mites, and they smell good and they look good.
Mm-hmm.
I cross my fingers, and every year it's the same thing. Like my friends, my husband, I'm complaining already. I don't think they're going to make it. I'm so nervous. You say that every year. Yeah. And then, to your point, the ones that survive are the ones I want. Those are my genetics. The other ones I don't. So that's, you just got to pay attention to them and not just sit them out there and not pay attention to them. Most people don't realize they have to feed them and treat them.
Right. Do you have a preferred metric for checking for mites, or a preferred way to knock them out?
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. You showed me the Dawn, using the Dawn dish soap. Yeah. I really like that. I was using the alcohol before, and that Dawn really, I show everybody that really works. And it's amazing how many mites will come off. So, and then treating them with, it's an art too. You have to find what works for you.
Right.
Okay. I'm not, I'm an apivar. I use Apivar. It might not work for somebody. I used to use Mite Away Quick Strip in like July if I had them bad. But I also think if you've got good bees, some of them are pretty hygienic and you don't have to treat them as heavily all the time, and just choose what you want. But the hives at the Franklin Park, this is pretty interesting. They were packages that we put in April, and I hadn't put a package in a while. I kind of make my own bees, and so they had a big high mite count. So it was too hot, and we put the Formic Pro on them, one pad, because it was like 90, just to see what would knock off. We didn't want to over medicate them, and a lot of mites dropped off. So then we did it 10 days later, a lot of mites dropped off. And then we found, boy, we still have a big mite count. So we figured, I'm taking it from your yard. We call it the learning yard, teaching yard. We figured we're going to lose them anyway because the mite count is so high. Let's try thymol. We're just teaching everybody. The thymol, we still got a big mite count. So we thought, well, this is just really crazy. So then we did, a month ago, we did 2 pads when the weather cooled down in September of the Formic Pro. And that really dropped them down. We came back and they still had them. So last week, I've never done oxalic, but we did it. And man, I could not believe how many mites came off. And then Thursday, we did it again. I checked yesterday. It was disgusting. So the thing is, they're probably not going to make it through the winter, but then again, they might. I don't underestimate them. They're bees and I can't read their mind. But
does that happen to be, I keep seeing some things and I keep seeing it in some other folks' yards, and other folks are starting to comment on it. The hive that you're talking about, does that happen? Is it possible that hive is on the outside edge or a corner in that bee yard?
No.
It's not.
No. But you know what I found? I did my research. I went around to all the new beekeepers in that area. And they're mite bombs.
Interesting.
And they don't, and I'm like, Lord, now how do I fix this? And they're young beekeepers. So I don't have that issue where I'm at. And do I give them a new queen? Do I send them a letter next year and say, come to the Franklin Park and follow what we do? And
maybe they're
so
not
we're
ready
all on
for
the
that.
same page.
That's the challenge. I know Ian Stepler, he's on here listening. So hey, Ian, I know Ian, we were talking about it not long ago, but it doesn't matter the scale. Whether it is 1 hive or 2 hives or a learning yard like you have at the Franklin County Conservatory, or up in Canada where Ian's at in his commercial out yards, he was surrounded by some other commercial beekeepers that were just absolutely, they were mite farmers, and he struggled with, he mentioned he struggled for years to get those bees where they needed to go. It was a constant uphill battle, and it wasn't until they moved out and he could get his bees onto those areas before he could actually start to see that turn around. It seems like it's a no-brainer, but it really doesn't take a lot. It takes 1 or 2 yards nearby you that is doing a phenomenal job at farming for mites, and you're just constantly playing catch up. But there's also another thing that I wonder if you've seen, Nina. You get to see a lot of different configurations of colonies with folks with different skill sets, experience levels, goals, context, you name it. What's interesting though is, obviously, I try to compare this with folks who are not quite on board with mites yet, to where if we were to go out onto a field walk right now here at the farm and we walk through, waist high weeds, right? There's a very good chance that when we come out and we check ourselves, we're going to have ticks. Okay. Understood. Get it. Great. Okay. If we wanted to prevent ourselves from having ticks, we could apply some different levels of icky chemicals all the way down to essential oils or whatever to try to repel or keep them away. Okay, great. But here's where this gets tricky. Just because we're going out and we're exposing ourselves to mites doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get sick. But if we go out into that field and we're exposed to a deer tick or one that's carrying Lyme disease, okay, now we've got a problem. If we go out and are exposed to something that like a Lone Star tick, for instance, now we've got another big problem. It only takes those carriers within those species to be the problem. Now, 90% of that load could have been totally fine, not an issue, but it's the ones that are actually carrying the viral loads that are the problems. Of course, if you're not familiar with the Lone Star tick and that disease, you become that allergic reaction to red meats and things like that. Of course, Lyme disease is awful. A lot of folks in Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota are familiar with that because of the kind of woodlands that we have. But the point here, what some folks are finding is we can have colonies with astronomical mite loads that are still somehow healthy and are chugging along and are overwintering. And I think we are too quick to say, well, it's because these bees are resistant to viruses or these bees are more hygienic. I think we've done a great disservice and just totally not even putting any time into thinking that just because we have mites and a lot of them doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be detrimental to the colony. If they're not carriers, they're not carriers. If they are carrying viruses, then that does matter. But I wondered that long way around the question is, are you seeing colonies that still could have high mite loads and yet still be healthy, or are you seeing the
Yeah.
opposite?
Yeah, no, we were talking about that today. A friend of mine. Last year, I had beautiful hives make it through the winter, and they had a couple mites. So, like February, March, I was freaking out. I'm thinking, oh God, they're going to die. They're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And they made it, and they're strong.
Yep.
And they're several years old, and they just requeen themselves. So, yeah, I'm wondering if some of them can tolerate them a little bit before they take them out, or do they eventually take them out like the next year or the next year? You know, maybe it takes them longer to affect them, like a cancer or something. I was just trying to figure it out. You know what? Because you don't, and then people say they don't see the mites on them, but are they looking underneath them? And they're not. And so, yeah, I do. I have some hives that I made it through the winter that had a light mite load, and they're still going strong now. And yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. I'm not a scientist. I just know it's an art. And as I learn and read, I kind of have good common sense. And
that's it. Yeah.
And if my dog has fleas, I treat it for fleas.
Right.
You know? And you should treat your bees if they are sick.
The thing is, we don't know what percentage of the mites are carrying viruses, and of the ones that are carrying viruses, how detrimental are the viruses. So as kind of a fix to that predicament, we're just doing what we can to remove mites out of the equation. You know, as you get experience with beekeeping like yourself, you learn to be comfortable questioning what you're seeing, and you get comfortable questioning your own bias towards a certain mode or method or of way of doing things. And I don't think I wasn't quite there for the first few years getting started. It was this way or the highway. And I think a lot of folks struggle with that. So I think it's fair to say at this point, Nina, you know, mite control, keeping mites down and keeping them down all year is a big deal. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, there's a certain, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word. Brian, can you spell that? Me either.
Dichotomy. I could spell
There's a certain, I was talking about it this year, is Ohio, we all want to believe that, like, oh, you know, our state is special, we're unique, right? And you have the same cliche thing, if you don't like the weather, give it 15 minutes, it'll change, right? Everybody in every city and state across the country says that, right? But there's something interesting with Ohio. You know, our focus is queens and nukes. So how we go about treating for mites and our strategy is going to be different for folks that are going to be raising honey crops. And the fact that we do have constant brood breaks. We are in a constant ebb and flow of brood rearing. But what's interesting, and we were talking with Ian about this as well, is in Ohio, when we get past our spring and fall flow, a lot of us are trying to gauge and strategize our mite plan based on whether or not we think we're going to have a fall flow. because at the same time that we're pulling off our summer traditionally around the 4th of July, most folks are pulling off the spring and early summer flows. We're getting things kind of set up and getting things boosted back up for fall time. But this year we had a trickle constantly. So there wasn't really a time where there was nothing coming in. And so we were constantly in collection mode and brood rearing mode. But when we get into like late August and into September, when the goldenrod starts to flirt, okay, if we weren't pulling fall honey, we would have laid our mite treatments on and had squeaky clean colonies going into October, and it would be a different conversation. But if you're dancing that dance on that tight wire and you are trying to pull a fall flow, if you're not using Formic and you're using some of the other products that you don't want to have on with supers, you're waiting until you pull your fall flow to do your mite treatment. And there's like a 2 to 3 week extremely critical window if you do that, to where if the weather breaks or it changes or the flow keeps going, you can kind of set yourself up to be really late in the year for controlling mites. Nina, do you see folks struggling with when to put on the treatments?
Oh, this year,
for how long?
Yeah, you just said it. This year, that's what I saw. Everybody was late getting their treatments on because they weren't pulling their honey off until late. So yeah, some of them were just treating 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Or yesterday, right, Brian?
Yeah, or yesterday,
Exactly.
or a week ago. I actually leave my goldenrod. I don't take my fall honey.
Okay.
Because I run a lot of NUCS, and that's my resource to go to divvy it up and share with everybody to get them over winter.
Yep.
So if I've got hives that got extra honey, then I just go around and put it on the ones that really need the help, and so I can prepare them for winter.
Well, at least that way you don't have the conundrum of explaining to all the honey customers why their goldenrods has to be dug out with a butter knife out of the jar, I guess.
Right. I don't do that. Yeah. I actually, where I'm at, I do quite well on my honey. I get a good spring flow and a good summer flow, and that's good for me. And because you're on a treadmill. Once you go above 10 hives and you keep going, you're on a treadmill. So pulling off honey is a pain in the butt because you're trying to get your bees healthy for winter. You've got NUCS, you're requeening. Right. I'm just now starting to relax. Like you said, we're exhausted right now.
Nina, I learned this year when I would go down to Greg's and, we go out into his yard. I've told him, Greg, I think I've told you this twice.
Uh-oh. Here we go for the whole world to hear. Hope it's good, Brian.
I will never be a commercial beekeeper because when it's just like the other day when we were putting the Apogard on those colonies, I like to sit and I like to look at my colonies. The other day, it's just crack the lid, throw the shim on, throw throw the treatment on, go to the next one, and you don't really, in that scale, you don't have the time to sit and enjoy them. If I wanted to sit and tell Greg, hey, let's sit down for half an hour here, let's get a chair and sit and look at the bees, he would have said, okay, you sit there, I need to go out here and get these other treatments on. So, but yeah, I like to sit and look at them, and Greg, I could never.
I agree with you. It's too much.
Yeah.
Because you have to store stuff. You have to dead out. You got to find a place for them. Yeah. You get more bees. You need more equipment. And then before you know it, your life is just bees, 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 bees. That's where I'm at. And
I have 11 colonies, and that's a lot. Like you said, you hit 10 or greater, you're in a different scale.
It's work.
You have to, it does. And this year I harvested most honey I ever have. And I mean, I was 8 hours, I think, the one day just pulling supers, harvesting. And it's like, then you get home and you're just utterly exhausted. And it's like,
and someone wants to buy it and they say, well, why can't you sell it for $7 a pound?
True.
Like Walmart.
Yeah.
You're like, what? Put a suit on. Let's work for a day, please.
Then you put your wet supers back on. In 2 weeks, you're back at it again. If it's been a good
That
90
was
grade.
Brian's story.
And that was my story. And I
Yours
said to my
too.
husband, I'm getting too old for this. I got bee
Yeah.
work to do. You
I
know?
had people saying this year that I
Yeah.
had like a never-ending flow.
It didn't. Yeah.
So, because I harvested 3 times this year.
So did I. Yeah.
So
We're not even in honey is not even our not even in our repertoire. You
It's
know,
a pain
this
in
year
my butt.
I've had to do things that I didn't even, you know, getting equipment, having it's I love my wife to death, and I want to make it as easy as possible for her and kids to do the things that need done, because we all help out on the farm, we all help with the bee business. Doing things like having to buy bottling tanks or this or those things that is so far from my vocabulary, because that is not when we got into raising bees for a business. It was queens and nukes, and yeah, that requires certain types of equipment to do all those kind of things. But historically, we pull very little honey, you know. And we have 7 kids in a large homeschooling community, and her friends were like, how can you have hundreds of colonies of bees but you don't have any honey for sale? Well, that's a whole conversation. So we've tried to do better with doing that. This year, the year of the rabbit, has been so abundant that, Nina, we have been pulling honey out of queen nukes and brood production colonies, because they were getting honey bound. They were getting pollen bound first, and that was the first red flag. It's like, oh my gosh, we're getting pollen bound. Even before the locusts came on, and we're thinking, what in the world's going on? So here we are trying to thin and strip colonies so the queens have places to lay and to work.
That's panic mode. You go into a panic mode.
What are you going to do with all that? Yeah.
That's why honey is a pain in the butt for a queen person raising queens. I get honey bound. I panic. I got to find other frames to put in so she has a place to lay. You're right. Yeah. It was a crazy year.
But for a lot of folks I know, well, Nina, it was awesome having you out at our learning yard. Lucas brought you out, and it was fun to finally get to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. It was cool to have you in the learning yard, have you a part of all that with everybody. It's always fun to have a different voice and a different take, and just someone else that has a different experience set with you when you're around folks and teaching folks. That was the first time I got to spend any kind of time with you, and I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. As we move along with the conversation, keeping the educator in you in mind, we've talked about mites, knocking them back, keeping them down. We've got challenges throughout the year. This year specifically, Nina, when you have, and we had them too, a lot of us mentors had first-year beekeepers that are coming into this year as their first maiden year voyage. And I've tried to be very clear with them and say, do not expect this every single year. Like, this is fantastic that you started off like this, but this is like a 1 in 8 year kind of a thing. Have you had any challenges trying to not scaring or with fear tactics with folks and winter loss? How have you approached new beginning beekeepers to say, hey, this is going great, and while it might look like it's awesome, be prepared for XYZ? Is there a way that you go about doing that?
Yeah, I just tell them my experience. My first 2 years, I thought I was great. My bees are great. And they died. And you just got to stick with it for about 5 years. If you make it through 5 years, I think you're going to be okay. If you can hang in there and get through the 5 years, I think you'll survive. I've got a lot of new beekeepers, like you said, this year. They're pulling the honey off, and I'm telling them that this won't happen ever again for a long time. This happened like 8 years ago, like you said, 8 or 9. Yeah. I got so much black locust, I thought I was going to get it every year, and I don't get that much. So, not just to be humble. I tell them to be humble, because it can come bite you, and and you don't realize it, and get that price for your honey this year, because you might not get that much next year.
That's actually what you just said there. Be humble.
Be humble.
Especially when they come into next year and hopefully their bees are living.
Oh, yeah.
There's, and I mean this respectfully and with love, but there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to feel victorious, as they should. But as they describe their experience with folks, sometimes we as humans have a habit of coming from a place of authority without the experience. So I think it'll be interesting next year as we see second year beekeepers start to coach and mentor. They're going to have a lot of experience that they're going to try to relay to folks that may or may not be on point just because the year went so well for them.
Mhm.
So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to kind of work with.
Yeah.
Um,
This year, what happened could almost spell disaster next year.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Just because, like you said, this is that one in every 8 year we had happen. And those that started this year are really going to have to pay attention to their colonies next year. Because if we hit those moments where we don't have that trickle the entire season, we don't, you don't have those colonies with the overabundance of, pollen, their stores. What are they going to do? They're
Right.
used to just this
Right.
overabundance. And now, you're going to have to pay
That-
very close attention.
That's when your experience comes in. You got to
Yeah.
feed
Yeah.
and start getting it together, and
Yep.
and realizing, you know what, I wasn't that good. I still have a lot to learn, and
Yeah.
I find a lot of them come back 2 or 3 years later and say, you were right. It was a lesson. I'm better
Yeah.
now,
there you go.
and that's good.
Yeah.
So moving throughout your strategy for the rest of the year, we talked about, okay, let's keep the mites down. Let's keep the chance of the viral loads building up in the colony, getting the bees sick. Let's keep that knocked down. Now we get into the part of the year where you get into the honey flow. We've talked about that. This year, there's not much to talk about. It was just too much, and it was nonstop. The problems that a lot of us had is the brood nests were being constricted and shrunk, and there was nothing there because of being either pollen or honey bound. And so we've tried to pull all that out, spin that, put fresh frames back, get them into a situation where they can start to build back up again. This winter is going to be interesting too, because some folks either have ginormous brood nests or they have very small brood nests. Most of the folks that have very small, like tiny small brood nests, were the ones that were completely, absolutely jammed and honey bound, and the queen had nowhere to lay at all. And if it was a first year queen, she might have just stayed there and idled and put up with it. But if it was a second year queen or a third year queen, a lot of folks were seeing absconding and swarming and a lot of things kind of going on. Even, I mean, I saw some swarm reports here in Ohio the first to last week still. So I think folks are still digging out of the honey. And then with the goldenrod coming on so hard and the aster coming on so hard, it's honey bound is I think was a big deal for a lot of folks this year. But let's assume that they took care of mites, Nina, and they were keeping the nests open for the queen to keep laying. The colonies were building up. Folks are mite washing to see where they're at, treating when they need to. As they get into, let's say, July and then August, what is your strategy on those bees cruising through late summer going into the fall time? Is there a certain strategy or method or management that you use?
I just feed them. If they need sugar water, I feed them. But if they're strong and healthy and they have enough honey on them, I let them go. I just keep an eye on them. But the last couple weeks, we've had that nice weather. Mm-hmm. So I went out and put sugar water on them so that they just don't eat what they have in house.
Great point.
Giving them a free. It's like I don't want them to eat their resources too quick because it's been so warm. So I went ahead and just gave them a bunch of sugar water to help them out so that they can keep their stores and they can store that. And then, so now I'll start getting ready to get my sugar blocks on like in November. I'll start making, I'll go around. If the bees are on the top, I'll put my sugar blocks on. Hopefully they're down below. That's what I want to see. But if they're not, I'll just manage them.
Did you see in a lot of the folks you were mentoring or even in your own colonies that, goldenrod was hot and heavy and they were utilizing that? They were brooding a little bit even later in the year. Mites are still growing late in the year. And then all of a sudden we got 1 or 2 killing frosts and then it's done. Goldenrod's off.
Yeah.
Asters are off. Everything is done. Now all of a sudden we went from a year of abundance to just straight out bee or pollinator massacres with hornets and wasps and jackets. Everyone's hungry or out foraging when the weather's nice.
Yeah, a lot of robbing. A lot of robbing.
What do you how do you guide folks through late summer, early fall robbing situations?
Hey, you know, if you're not sitting in the yard and watching, you don't know you're getting robbed. I just try to reduce my entrance and get any honey that I have on the top that's not completely drawn out, and just push them down and just reduce my entrance and hope that they can't get in. And if I do see them robbing, I'll just plug the hole up while I'm working in the yard. And a lot of times when they're robbing, that tells me, I go around and put a grade on my hives, like an A+, a B+, a C+, because then if someone's getting robbed, she's probably a C+. There's something wrong with her. Okay, she's not as healthy as I think she should be. So I'll go check. Maybe I need to requeen her. Maybe she's got too big of a mite load. But that's just an indication to me that if she's getting robbed, she's not there. She's not the healthiest of my hives.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of things that can kind of go on and help induce that. But when you see this time of year, everything being on and on fire and just so much nectar still coming in, and then it gets shut off so quick. Those bees, when it's nice out, or any of the yellow jackets and the wasps, they all are going to be out foraging. They're still going to work. They're trying to bring something home. And then we'll start to see some of those colonies that are either the ones that were a little bit weaker, a little bit sicker, the ones that are a little smaller, are the ones that are vulnerable. So like the same way, if we have entrance dials, we're choking them down. If they're on a full size landing board with an entrance, we choke that down just to try to slow that down some. Upper entrances, we usually try to close off too if we have anything with an upper entrance. To minimize how much the traffic kind of coming, in and out of there. Bucket feeders has been helpful for us to feed those on top without so much open feed on the inside. Trickling that seems to help not entice or induce, so much robbing. But as you get into the fall time, and of course, robbing is one of the absolute biggest threats, and we're trying to figure out, okay, for some reason, is this colony not heavy enough? Is it too heavy? I know on a lot of ours, just the first part of this week, we were pulling the last of the goldenrod off and spinning it, getting that out of the way, and putting all those empty combs back on. And then we started backfilling with Hive Alive mixed with Pro Sweet, just to give them a little extra nutrients, give them some thymol inside of that syrup, help it with gut digestion, the gut biome, gut health, to try to give them a little bit of a health boost. The thing about that, Nina, and I think maybe you could speak to it, is the winter bees are already made at this point, right? And so we're not going to fix or do anything that we didn't already do 2 or 3 brood cycles ago.
Right.
Where are the bees at in Ohio right now? Where are the bees at in their biological progression?
Well, I noticed that she's not laying. She's shutting down.
Yeah.
So these are the bees that she's taking into the winter with her.
Yeah.
And whatever brood is left. But I'm getting a lot of calls from people that, and again, what they don't know, that the queen shuts down at this time. And if I see that they're not fat and they're not a lot of bees in there, then I'm going to take my losses now and my increases in the spring.
That's good.
And I'll go ahead and combine that hive with somebody else.
Yeah.
And then if I've got a couple weak NUCS that maybe are 3 high, but I think they're going to do well, they just need to be warm, I'll probably put them on next week. I'll go out and put a double screen board on top, and then just put them on top of a strong hive that's got a lot of heat.
Yeah. Well, maybe we're hitting on the 9 o'clock hour. There's a couple things that I wanted to get to, and then maybe we can start to literally wrap up this conversation with hive wraps, installation. Brian, you see what I did there?
I see. I see.
Okay.
Nina, there's times where Greg, he tries to get tricky.
I see that.
I got to keep Brian on his toes there.
Right.
Well, Nina, I got a little bit of a surprise thing I wanted to share. So Nina, of course, you visited the learning yard this year. Brian has been throughout several. The learning yard, for folks who don't know, is just a way. It's an outreach. It's a bee ministry, literally.
It's awesome.
We're just trying to get folks good practical information for our area, and then take that information right out to the yard that we've learned and go hands-on and see it actually manifest in every single one of these different colonies, different configurations, different bees, so folks can just learn hands-on. No politics, no BS, no arguing. There's nothing going on. It's just beekeepers who love bees, who want to see their bees do well, that want to fellowship with each other, build each other up, see each other do well, and be there to support each other. That's what the Learning Yard at Nature's Image Farm is all about. So it's fun when someone like Nina, who is cut from the same cloth, is there to share with it. To me, that is so awesome, because she can pick up tricks from us. When I come visit her in her learning yard, I can pick up tricks from her. We can all take it back to our folks, and we can all do better. And I think that's a big deal. The reason that I bring that up is tonight is kind of the first talk that we've kind of branded as the Learning Yard Live.
Oh, I like that.
A lot of our folks have asked us. Brian was there. We're trying to figure out how can we keep doing better for you guys. What kind of information do you want out there? So we thought it would be cool throughout most of the year. This is going to look a little different. And these types and the late parts of the year, it's going to be coming from here. It's going to be a collaborative effort, like you see above. But we're going to go live from the Learning Yard, sharing this kind of information. It might be talks like this with guests like Nina. It might be live from the shop as we're talking about and showing all these things. It might be live right in the Learning Yard as we're putting on a formic pad to close up the apame. Meanwhile, Brian's 100 yards back and watches half the bees abscond out of the colony right when we do it, but we don't see it because we're looking at. So it's going to be a fun way to share the beekeeping experience in a way that we're not coming from a place of authority. We are not coming from a place as we own the information and you have to do this. It's just beekeepers sharing beekeeping with each other. And so I'm looking forward to that. Because of that, Nina, you have had a lot of great articles. A lot of folks maybe don't know you write for Bee Culture.
I just started doing that.
Okay. Tell us about that.
I have an extensive library of bee books from like 1871, 1861, just old bee books. So I started reading them. I love history about 15 years ago. And then I just started writing the history of these women and how they interlocked with everybody and the bees and what they did and how important it was for them to work the bees and how they worked with Langstroth, Cook, Huber, and everybody. I mean, so we forget there were women that were beekeepers as well, and
right.
some of them were really good queen breeders. So, Jerry Hayes, I submitted some of the articles. I'm not a writer. I love teaching. I write like I talk. My punctuations were all bad, so I had to take a brush up course, and I found my best friend Grammarly.
Nice. There you go.
So I can tell a good story. And I took it one step farther. My friend Linda Miller, she's a really good sleuth when it comes to ancestry. So instead of finding what someone wrote about the women, we dig and find out who they were married to, how they got into bees,
Nice.
That kind of stuff. So yeah,
Very cool.
I like it.
And that's a great article. That's in this edition of Bee Culture?
Yeah, this one is Mrs. Axel. She was an invalid. And in 1882, she pulled off 39,000 pounds of honey. So.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Golly.
Yeah. So,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I like the teaching. I think we all should be humble. We should share. Sometimes people get the politics and all that garbage and they don't want to share. Well, that's a road to nowhere. I think the road is just being friendly to everybody and teaching and the education and the hands-on. It's just, if we don't know our history about bees, then we really don't know our bees. So we should know it all.
Well, I think there's a saying most of us probably have heard or if not repeated, but those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. The same can be said with beekeeping. On that note, I want to show you something here, Nina.
Okay.
is my oldest son Nate works here for the county in the maintenance department, and they were kind of cleaning out and moving a library. And of course, Nate, talking with the folks that he works with that were beekeepers, and we do this and do that. Well, they were moving all these books, and they were getting rid of a bunch of stuff.
Oh, wow.
So Nate knocks on the office door and brings in a big old copy paper box of all these really cool edition bee books that I know you'll absolutely just love.
Oh my gosh.
So I gotta share this one with you guys. So this is a
Gleanings?
October 1959
Oh, cool.
Gleanings in Bee Culture.
Wow.
Okay. And so the reason why I dug this out, this is going to be a little bit of a story time briefly, just for a minute.
I love it. This is my life.
Because here, so Brian, let's see, can you put that on full screen so maybe you can see a little better? Can you know how to do that?
Let me see here. Solo layout. There.
Okay. All right. So again, so here's the cover, Gleanings in Bee Culture.
Cool.
October 1959. I'll just show, if you've never seen some of these old things, they are just so
they're
cool.
so cool.
There's just, I mean, just the way things are kind of laid out, the ads that are inside of here. I'll quickly share just one of these ads here. Starlines and Midnights.
Yeah, they were
Okay, for $1.30 a piece. Queens were $1.30. Packages were $5. This magazine this edition was 20 cents. But I thought this was pretty cool. Two things I want to read for you. In this October 1959 edition, there's a question and answers towards the back. And the question was, a daughter queen different from the mother queen? So the question is, last fall, I requeened an Italian colony with a Caucasian queen. They wintered well and built up very nicely in the spring. In July, the queen swarmed and set up housekeeping in the same yard. So what I've noticed is how they say things and some of the language, even though it wasn't that long ago, is still a little bit different.
Yeah.
So anyways, the queen swarmed and set up housekeeping in the same yard. When I discovered the colony had swarmed, I looked for cells in the old hive, found a virgin queen of different color from the old Caucasian queen, not Italian and far from Caucasian. The offspring of this queen has the same color as the queen. Why has the new queen of a different color from the old one, while all the rest of the colony is left from the old queen are all Caucasians, drones included? So I think it's difficult to maybe dig through exactly how that was worded, but she had a queen daughter of a different color than what came from the colony. And what was interesting is the answer. I think everyone who just asked, if you heard the question, why is there a different color of the queen? Well, now after 60 years later, we understand genetics a little bit better and how many drones that there are and the alleles and how all those are kind of put together and the diversity the queen has at all times. But here's the answer. The answer, we have read with interest your letter concerning your recent experience with queens. According to what we know or think we know about races of bees, the Caucasian virgin queen you found in the hive, from which a swarm of Caucasian bees had issued, should have been the same type of queen as her mother, especially since the progeny of her mother queen was uniformly marked, indicating Caucasian characteristics. Could it be possible that this young queen that you saw drifted into the hive from another colony? This occasionally happens. However, if you do not have a Caucasian colony in your yard, other than the one which you introduced a Caucasian queen, this drifting would hardly seem possible. Of course, there may be some other Caucasian colonies in a neighborhood. We shall be glad to hear from you again in the event that you come up with a solution to your question. The dialogue back and forth is so cool.
Well, they had Daydon in 1871 paid $20 for a queen. He went over to Italy and brought 100 of them back, and he paid 20 for them, and then he had to charge people. So that's crazy.
So here's one. I got just this is going to take about 2 minutes to read, but this is why this is important to read today. So this is Wintering Bees in the North.
Love it.
Okay, so this is from
That's awesome.
1959.
That's awesome.
If you're not into this kind of thing, just fast forward, go get a cup of coffee. I'm just going to briefly read out of this for a minute. This is important to understand where folks are coming from then, because what you're going to find is you're going to find history repeats itself, and we will find ourselves arguing over which is the better box, which is the best way to win, or which is the better queen. And if we understand that and we appreciate that and we accept it, when those cycles continue to come back up again, we can just appreciate it without coming from a place of arguing with folks. We can just, okay, here we are. Let's work through it.
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Frank Lane, thank you for that $10 super sticker. I really appreciate that. I know you really can't see some of this, so I apologize. But I just want to give credit where credit is due. So this article here is written, looks like Dr. Mykola H. Haydick, Department of Entomology and Economic Zoology, University of Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota. Okay, so, and we'll dig through here. So just story time, folks. Here we go. Northern winter is the most difficult time for the survival of the honeybee colonies. In order to help his bees to withstand successfully the ravages of winter, every beekeeper should know the fundamentals of bee management, and he should understand the processes which take place in his colonies during this critical time. A good queen in the hive at all times is a necessary condition for successful beekeeping. A poor queen in August or early September means poor wintering, because the only bees which contribute to a successful wintering are those that have been reared from the eggs laid in August and early September. A young, vigorous queen is also more likely to weather the winter. For successful wintering, however, the colony also needs sufficient stores of pollen and honey. The beekeeper should remember that pollen is as important as honey. He should be careful not to remove pollen combs before wintering. Honey is the main fuel to keep the cluster warm. Consequently, a colony going into the winter must have at least 60 pounds of honey and from 4 to 6 frames of pollen to carry them through until the nectar supply is sufficient in the spring. To be ready for winter, a 2-story standard hive should weigh 125 to 135 pounds. At the time honey is removed, the hive entrances should be contracted to minimize the possibility of robbing. The keeper should also provide upper or middle entrances. These will facilitate the removal of moisture from the hive and at the same time prevent suffocation of the bees, and the bottom entrance becomes clogged with ice or dead bees during the winter. If there are top or middle entrances, the bottom entrance may be closed completely, or the beekeeper may leave a small hole allowing several bees to pass through. I'm going to read just one more paragraph and then we're going to close out on this. It is of interest to note that already Langstreth stressed the importance of upward ventilation in his book, The Hive and the Honeybee, published in 1859. He related, besides his experiences of other beekeepers who wintered 20 colonies of bees, which were apparently in very good condition, 19 of these, having only lower entrances, did not have the upper ventilation. One colony was in a hive suspended 20 inches from the ground and without any bottom board. The chamber for surplus honey boxes was open to the north and had 8 1-inch holes, all uncovered. The beekeeper lost all 19 colonies, while the one that was treated in such an unorthodox way survived winter in very good condition. They go on in here to talk about and kind of go into a little bit of study on something that Nina, I think, could probably speak to us about. Then they called it packing the hive. And I'll quickly, I'll find that part here and then we'll move on. At present, the beekeepers are still divided on the question of how best to protect their colonies during winter in order to help bees conserve heat and thus bring about smaller consumption of stores and better wintering. Phillips and Demuth, on the basis of their experiments, recommended protecting the hives by packing them in wooden cases with an insulation of planer shavings several inches thick. Many beekeepers of the North continue to pack their colonies for the winter. However, more than 100 years ago, Langstroth summed up the essentials for a successful wintering in such words: if the colonies are strong in numbers and stores, have upward ventilation, easy communication from comb to comb, and water when needed, and hive entrances are sheltered from the piercing winds, they have all the conditions essential to wintering successfully in the open air. At present, there is a large number of research workers and practical beekeepers who claim that neither heavy nor light packing is necessary. So that's just a small excerpt from Gleanings in Bee Culture, October 1959. And why I think that's cool is when you dig into there, we are just talking about the same exact things based on our practical beekeeping,
Yes.
what we've learned a lot the hard way. And here we are
Yeah.
60 some years later talking about the same thing. But I noticed a couple things with that, Nia. Number one, refers to the beekeeper as he
Yeah.
every single time.
Yeah.
And I love
Yeah.
how that's changed. And I love that you're here as
Yeah.
a testament to that too. And the second thing was packing the hive. That was the first time that I heard it described as packing the hive in wood cases with several inches of planer wood shavings.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about
They
what that means to you and if you do anything like that.
they started doing that like around like the 1900s. They started putting them in that case and then packing them. Before they were putting them underground in shelters. But to your point, they weren't surviving either. They were losing a lot of them. And Langstroth was right. If you keep the wind off of them and keep them healthy, they are going to survive. And they have a chafe. They talk about the chafe hives that they use,
Mm.
putting the sawdust on the top to keep the moisture out. Um, I find even going way back to 1870s, not much has changed. Everybody wants to reinvent the wheel,
They
and
do.
and they want to buy all this new really cool equipment that looks like a cooler. It's styrofoam and all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, it nothing's really changed, and the bees do just fine. So they don't need a big old mansion to make it through the winter.
You know, you mentioned it earlier. It seems like the colonies you nearly write off that are just on that borderline are the ones that
Yeah,
make it, and the ones that look super good are just too big, creating too much heat, eating too many
yeah.
reserves, causing problems in there. Um, I think that I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong. At least my experiences was also similar, and I also heard them talk about it in here. At least in my neck of the woods, ventilation, I have killed bees
Oh
because they
yeah.
were dripping cold and wet. I have seen a Georgia package queen come up in the same year and withstand -5 throughout the winter in a 5-frame single medium and cruise right through. But it seems like no matter what we do, the bees can withstand cold to a certain extent if they're healthy. But it's a lot of moisture that's inside of the hive that's dripping on the bees, causing cold, um, wet bees. That seems to be the problem. How do you handle ventilation or moisture, or is that even a concern for you with your colonies?
I'm old school. I put corks on the top. Um, and I just make sure they've got good ventilation. I put a corks on the top. Sometimes I'll put popsicle sticks underneath just to give them, and I tarp them. I tarp them to keep the wind off, and I keep the
Mm,
front open, and I stick
mhm.
the tarp underneath the bottom. I make them cozy.
Yeah.
Um, I could, if I was allowed, I'd bring them all in the house, but I'm not. But I remember years ago bringing bees up from my packages from Georgia, and the holes in the can were real big, and the bees were all wet.
Yeah.
And they were cold too. So you're right. They can take the cold, but they cannot take that damp. So I brought them in the house and put them over a heater, and they did real well. They heated up, and dried off. But I lost a lot of them.
A,
They
a
don't like it.
funny, not so funny story is when you have to first get good at killing bees, and then you have to get good about worrying about whether or not they're dead or not. But I have literally taken, I can remember a couple years ago, I thought way to go, knucklehead, you did it again. Your wife was right. You should have did this. You should have did that. The bees are dead. And I can remember going through, and it was like maybe just a hair before maple bloom. And on one of those days, it was like maybe 45 degrees out there. I'm just going through, and if they weren't moving, I was shaking them out.
Yeah.
She's shaking them out on the ground, cleaning up the boxes. I didn't want mice or anything. And then I go back the next a couple hours later when it warms up, and guess what? There's no bees anywhere to be found. All those big long piles of dead bees that I was shaking up,
I've done that.
they warmed back up.
Yep.
They flew off, and they flew to
Yeah.
other colonies. And I'm thinking, oh my, are you serious?
Yeah, and the bad thing is you thought they were dead, so you're pulling the frames out and just whipping them on the ground.
That's it.
Because it's a cleanup,
Yep.
and then you come back and you're like, oh my God,
Yep.
there's the queen. What did I do?
Oh my God. I'm glad I'm not the only one that's done that. So the hard lesson learned is wait until it's a good 60-degree day, and then call it. Don't call it too soon, because you just never know.
It's true. I brought them in the house thinking they were dead, and I got in trouble because they warmed up and were flying all around the house.
Oh my gosh.
And it was my second year as a beekeeper, so I learned.
Well, that's great. That's you have to know. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you do, then it's just one of those things. Brian, can you?
That's funny.
This has been great.
Up the Brian? Can you cue up the giveaway apparatus?
The giveaway apparatus.
Is that just the? Yeah, do you know how to do it? I've got a little giveaway here.
Oh, okay.
So our friend Justin Ruger over at Accessible Beekeeping, we are now carrying his books here at the store, and they'll be on our website. Henry Meets the Honeybee. All the new ones too, where it's Honey Teaches Beekeeping to Kids.
I love it.
And also Honey Teaches Beekeeping. This is for mom and dad. So what we're giving away tonight is the 3-pack, all 3 books. See, Brian's got one, signed by Justin. But there's a little secret that Brian probably, I don't even know if Brian knows. Brian, do you have Honey Teaches Beekeeping to Kids? Okay. Is there page numbers? There's no page numbers. Well, you guys are gonna see it here first. What do you see here, Brian? It looks like a kid and some NUCS and some packages, right? Yeah. Well, that's my son Luke, and he's shaking one of the packages here. Then of course you can see there's our NUCS are in the picture and our queens.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we've got several pages that Nature's Image Farm is in, and a couple of these books. So not only are you getting an awesome book written by a super great dude, you're getting a piece of Nature's Image Farm is also in several of these books. And so I think that's pretty cool too. So we're going to give away 3 on that 3-pack. There it is.
I'm going to have him sign it next time I come down.
Have to have Luke sign them. All right. So tonight's giveaway is the 3-pack of the Henry Meets series, written and illustrated by Justin Ruger, published and distributed by Hippie Chick Apiary. Be sure to check them out. And also Accessible Beekeeping, great folks. So I guess if you're interested in the 3-pack, put #BeeBooks, and Brian will do the magic to have the thing win the, you know what I'm trying to say. Right, Brian?
We're going to do something. We're going to do that.
There it is. Okay. So #BeeBooks if you're interested, and we will ship that out to a lucky winner. As that kind of builds up, Nina, what's been your experience? I know you have some folks that are, kind of hardlined. They will only look at peer-reviewed, scientifically based information to make every decision in the bee yard, and you have some folks who haven't read a single one of those. who would just learn from the bees, and there's a balance that we all find between that. Have you found a balance? What works for Nina?
What works for me, it's an art, it's a skill, and just hands-on and having common sense and doing what I think works for me. I don't listen. I like listening to the older beekeepers because, like, a lot of things haven't changed from then, and I try just to listen to what everybody has to say, but really put the, how can I say it? Use my own practices in doing it and what works for me. I don't want to switch my track now and try something else because I might fail at it because I've been successful with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like with my mite treatments, my friends are saying you should try this, you should do that. I know what's been working for me, so I'm just going to stick to that.
Right.
You know, I think hands-on and getting in those hives year after year after year is your best learning tool. And if you don't get in them, you don't know. That's my thing. And they're afraid to go down below and see what's down there. You really have to go through your hive and get somebody that knows what they're doing and follow them. I have a couple good friends. Dwight Wilson is one of my buddies. He's an older gentleman, but he taught me how to make good NUCS. He taught me how to get my honey production going. Things I didn't know, and I've learned, and now I do it my way from what he showed me, but I don't do it exactly like him. Follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's just the best advice. I'm not an expert. I don't like saying you're doing this wrong or you should be doing that.
Right.
It's beekeeping. It's your pet. You can do whatever you want to do. But you will find out that you might have to do this or that in your way to make it work.
Yep, that's awesome. There's there is an art. You mentioned it. Bob Benny talks about that a lot. There is an art to beekeeping. A lot of that comes through experience and wisdom, but you also have to be a little bit of a risk taker and try some things and figure out what works for you, and find that magic formula of learning and growing and taking it all in. So, okay, well, tonight's winner for the bee books is Tony.
Another Ohio beekeeper.
Good.
Oh, that's cool. Tony, shoot me an email over at nature'simagefarm@gmail.com, and we'll get you squared away. We'll either get them shipped out to you, or you can come up here to the farm and visit. So as we go ahead and wrap up this conversation, Nina, we're going to bring in the other leg of the stream team guy. There he is, Mr. Bruce Jenny. How's it going, Bruce?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sounding good. We got a fancy
I'm
piece of
down here.
equipment over your shoulder there, looks like.
Yeah, just down here in the honey bottling room. I've got family here, so I'm kind of in a different room. But just got home from our little fall festival trunk or treat at
Nice.
church, so I thought I'd just check in.
Cool.
Listen to the conversation on the way home. You guys are doing a great job. I wish I was in on more of it.
Well, thanks for coming in here at the last minute to rub in your Alabama wintering techniques for us all here stuck in Ohio. I mean, you know, you do what you have to do. What does Ohio, or what does Alabama winterizing look like for you, Bruce?
I mean, it's the same principles. It does get chilly here. I would never say really cold. But, you know, when it's cold or chilly, you have condensation that happens. You need to have the ventilation. I have cracked my lids in the wintertime on days when it's a little bit warmer and there's condensation dripping in the colonies, especially in the shade. They seem to be seem to be worse. And, but, you know, similar principles. The difference is, I think the food stores are different. We have bees flying they're never in the colonies in the cluster more than a day or two at a time, probably. So they can plow through the food so fast. You just have to make sure they have the weight on them. And, but you don't want to go into winter with too much. If you have too much honey at the end of the summer, the hive beetles will slime out, and, you know, you just got to kind of balance that and figure that out. You really don't need more than probably at most a super of honey down here at most in the wintertime.
Wow.
On top of your deep. But like I say, you've got to watch them. You may have to feed them during the wintertime some, but you never have to worry about that for too long because it gets warm enough for them to fly. So you're not going to, anyway, it's just a whole different ball game, but the principles are still the same. You know, you got to have ventilation. Make sure they have
Nina,
make sure they have food to eat, and then you should.
Nina,
be
what Bruce will do is we'll be in the thick of winter up here, and Bruce will have a chilly day, and it'll start in the morning about 50, and in the afternoon he'll hit 70. And when we have a foot of snow up here, we will get a picture of his flagpole with his flag and a perfectly sunny day.
Flip flops, short pants, cooking out on the
75,
grill.
75 degrees. Yeah, that's awesome.
And he'll be like, it was a little chilly today. And we're like, come on.
So he likes to rub it in.
Not Bruce, never.
If it gets in the 30s, it's, heaven forbid the upper 20s, but in the 30s down here at night, people think we're just going to, freeze and have icicles and stuff. It's crazy. People can't stand the cold. So we do get in the 30s some, occasionally the 20s for lows, but you're never more than a couple of days from a 50-degree day. And usually not more than a week or two from a 70-degree day. So it's a different world for sure. But, our bees build up a lot faster. Our season's longer, so you have to be ready sooner. We're making splits. Last year, I busted out a bunch of splits at the end of February.
Wow.
And it's risky then because we have that fall, summer, whatever it is they call fall, spring, or whatever they call it down here where it gets warm for a couple of weeks. And then March is sometimes our coldest month. And so in February, we got stuff starting to bloom, the red maple. The bees are out, they're happy, they're starting to really build up. And then March will hit and we'll have the coldest weather for the whole winter. And so it's just kind of tricky to do everything. But as long as you stay on top of them, it's a pretty good area to have bees.
That's awesome. We're wrapping up, Bruce, tonight, talking about we were just talking about ventilation a little bit. I know one of the big changes that I made is I used to have too much ventilation, it seemed, in the colonies where I had and primarily the nuke yards. Every single box I used to have like a 1-inch hole in the front with a dial, and then a 1-inch hole in the back with hardware cloth, and I would just stack those up. And to me, it made sense, keep them all ventilated. And then I would put all those colonies together on stands and cluster them up to do what Nina was talking about with wrapping. The big benefit is a wind break, keeping that wind from blasting between all the sidewalls of that colony does make a big difference. Well, when I use that, if you guys have heard me say it, when I use the FLIR camera to actually look at the IR imprint of the colonies to see where is the heat at, where is the heat loss, what I noticed for a couple years in a row is that the bees would actually be away from that, what I would now consider excessive ventilation. They were on the front side of the colonies, away from all those 1-inch back holes. And then I stopped doing it. What was interesting is the bees were always, you could see them, that heat signature, they would always be way up away from that. No matter the orientation of the box or the wind, they were clustering away from that 1-inch hole. For whatever reason, they just couldn't propolize up 1/8-inch hardware cloth over that 1-inch hole. So I thought, well, that just told me exactly what I needed to know. So I stopped doing that. When we migrated towards running migratory pallets and things like that, it's a little harder to do some of those ventilation type things. And we pretty much keep our entrances choked down to like a 1/3 opening all year on the pallets. But it seems like the colonies that we do put, I get just what I call a winter shim on, which is like just a 2-inch box all the way around. On the front and on the back of that box, I'll just do a plunge cut on the table saw to just put a 1/8-inch cut on both sides, and then put window screen on the back. Very small, very little ventilation, but I think it does allow that you are going to lose a little bit of heat, but I think I'm losing more moisture as that heat rises. It gives me a place to put some winter and supplemental feeding. Yeah. But what I notice is I don't have any colonies that are wet or dripping or mold or mildew on the inside. Nina, what do you do for ventilation? You mentioned corks and popsicle sticks. Have you done anything else as far as ventilation goes, or has that always worked for you?
That's always worked for me. I'll put the shim on, and I have the hole in the front and a little hole in the back, a small hole.
Okay.
But yeah, it works for me. So yeah. I don't want to change the horse in the middle of the track.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, and I go through winter with a lot of hives, and I might lose 1 or 2. And the ones that I lose, last year I lost 3 in a nuke, and they were ones that I gave a C+ going into the winter. Okay, so
Yeah.
I knew they weren't gonna, make it anyway. It was a 50-50. But yeah, that ventilation is very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on ventilation? What works for you? What doesn't?
Oh, let me ask you
Well,
before,
Sure.
Brian, do you use a bottom screen board or like or
Solid.
the solid? I found if I use the solid, Brian, I got more moisture. So I use the screen and put a board in it. And if it is a nice day, I might pull the board out a little bit in the front to give a little more ventilation.
So I just switched over to all solid bottoms.
Oh.
I had screened, and it seems like the colonies that I saw, I had and this is a whole entire, this is another conversation, but I had a poly hive that had a solid bottom, and and then resource colonies, they have a solid bottom. They're the double nuke setups. So I switched everything over to solid bottoms now. And I just talked to Greg about this the other day. Very early on in my beekeeping, journey, I was turned on to what they call Vivaldi boards. And I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
I still have a few of them. I want to get a type of a shim made that's similar to a Vivaldi.
Okay.
So, but, and with the Vivaldis, I think I've stuck with those just because they have a little bit of an upper entrance. They have some ventilation. And then what I've always done when I used those is when I, pull my cover and I always put burlap in the top of mine.
Okay.
I just keep burlap in there, not real tight, it's fluffed up. And then if I notice moisture is developing on the burlap, I have an extra stock of it. I'll pull that burlap and put fresh in it that's dry.
Okay.
So all of that moisture that's built up on that burlap, it's just removed all in one fell swoop. I'm just like, okay, well, you're not going to stay in there, and that's worked for me. So this year, I don't have enough of the Vivaldi boards, but I talked to Greg the other day. I want to get some shims and tweak them a little bit so that it's a similar principle. So I can put burlap in the top, similar. And that's always worked for me. I'm in Trumbull County, so I'm Northeast Ohio. I'm a little bit below the snow belt, though. We don't get, we're like almost into Mahoning County. We're on like the southern side of it. So, but that strategy's always worked for me. So the ventilation, I know is key. So we'll see. I got to get everything. I think in the next week, I really have to just decide what I'm going to do. I probably will end up making another trip down to visit this one. And
we'll put you to work.
yeah. And just get some shims and stuff done and get everything squared away. But I'm really leaning towards, like I said, I'm not going to wrap my hives, but I'm really leaning on putting some type of a foam board on the top of my cover just to keep that snow and the ice from building up on my outer covers. So
I struggle with a lot of those things because what works for like 1 to 4 hives might work for 8 to 10, but then 11 to 14, all of a sudden it gets different. 15 to 20, and you go up to several hundred colonies. It's a numbers game. You're almost you have to be you have got to create consistency and uniformity in the operation, or you will kill yourself with 1,000 cuts of tripping and figuring this out and figuring that out. That can go good or bad. One that we used to have tremendous problems with screen bottom boards raising brood in the springtime, and it was such a bad problem. with too much cold moisture and cold ventilation coming through the colonies that we trashed every single one of them and went solid
Wow.
bottoms all the way. When we went solid bottoms, then it was phenomenal. We could make splits way sooner, raise much more brood. And then the only thing that we really had to do was just create a little bit of ventilation somewhere in the colony for the wintertime. And it was golden. But to get into and do even things like a piece of foam board on the lids, now we're talking about different configurations that we would need for hive lids to do that, just to create that one thing. Or if we did, like, and all these things, to be crystal clear, just because I don't do them, or Nina or Bruce or Brian, doesn't mean that they're good or bad. It's just what fits within our operation with our management styles and practices. There's no way in the world we can have 3 different bottom boards and lids for 300 colonies, and we can't have all these different we have got to create uniformity and consistency. But what that also does is it affords you a luxury of not being able to try and do all those things and see how the bees respond, and then you get that really live in your face feedback to say, okay, maybe this is worth the effort. One of those things that seems like it was worth the effort was that ventilated shim on top that we could put either a fondant or a dry sugar or a Hive Alive font, something in, and it ventilated. So there's all these little things we have to figure out to where there is, there's no black and white, doesn't seem like, when it comes to that. You guys were briefly talking there about wrapping.
Try that.
Nina, do you do anything else? You have some really cool canvas stitched wraps that I see on your website that folks can go check out at ohioqueenbee.com, that you can slip over your colonies, still have access to the top if you do want to feed, have
they're cool.
little viewing windows if you want to peek in.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about how that fits with your current management?
I love them. I'm trying to think. I can't think of his name, out of Purdue. I just read an article. He said you've got to wrap your hives, keep them warm. He believes in that. And my covers that I have, it's boating fabric, and they're pretty neat. They keep the bees so warm, though, that the people that I've sold them to, come March, they've got to take them off because the bees are bubbling over. And there's pockets inside that you can put styrofoam in if you want to double up the protection. But they slip right over the top. There's a zipper on the top that you can unzip it and fold it over and throw some winter patties on it. Zip it back up. It's got a top screen that rolls up like a camper. Like a camper window. It rolls up for ventilation, and there's one at the bottom. And they're waterproof. I like them. I used to just go buy plastic from like the hardware store, and just like big sheets of plastic, and just push them together and throw them over, and that worked fine too. You just got to figure out what works well for you. Me being a fashion designer, pattern maker, when COVID hit, I figured, let me do my bee cover. But if that's not for you, wrap them, cover them, protect them somehow. I used to do like the old wooden boxes around them and keep the front open and put my NUCS in, and that helps a lot too. That wind is really the worst thing for me in Ohio here. Yeah.
I'm lucky in that where I have 9 colonies. They're at my mom's place, and then I have 2 at a farmer's property. I'm lucky in that in both locations, they really don't get hit by the wind. My main one, where 9 are, there's a hill that comes up and down, and there's enough trees that any like wind that comes through there, it gets broken up. So they never really have been hit by extreme wind. I'm lucky. So both locations I've been fairly lucky, and I haven't had to put up like any windbreaks or anything like that. So
I think windbreaks is something that I think just about anybody can do. It seems like, I think we've already established, we would probably all agree that the cold really isn't hurting the bees, unless maybe you get up to like central or northern Canada or further north where it
Right.
gets super, and then that's a different story. But I think in
Yeah.
our neck of the woods where we might see -10 Fahrenheit for a night or two, and it overall is, you know, no colder than -5 at the coldest in the wintertime Fahrenheit. It seems like that's not really the big deal. But when you get 30 or 40-mile-an-hour winds, when it's, you know, 5 degrees outside or 10 degrees and that
They
wind
can't
chill gets
take it.
cold, you know, if you think about, you know, a colony, you know, I used to think that we were trying to keep the warmth in and keep the inside of the colony nice and toasty and warm. But when I was using the FLIR camera, when I put all those colonies together, like I mentioned earlier, I seen that they were moving away from the ventilation. And when I would put all these nukes and smush them all together, my reasoning was that they would use it as a thermal bank and they would share the common walls for warmth. But the FLIR camera kind of exposed the mental fallacy that I had with that. And in fact, every colony was in the center of every box, and they weren't sharing the side walls. So I'm
Wow.
thinking, well, what is the benefit of pushing them all together? I think the only benefit is it creates a windbreak on that
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
side of every box, and I think that is a big deal.
And that's
Um,
why I do it, because
yep.
it's a windbreak.
And I think that works great. So
Yeah.
I think if folks, and I mean this in a non-confrontational way, if you are considering wrapping or putting any of these things on your hives, definitely consider ventilating the colony. If you are wrapping with black tar paper, if I could only share the only concern that I would have is if it is in direct sun and it is getting excessively warm, sometimes you can have that colony get warm prematurely. And if they don't have ventilation in the colony, they're going to they can build up an enormous amount of heat inside of there. Where
Yeah.
that's a problem is when that's January and they get excessively warm and they break cluster and they eat, they can absolutely tear through food stores really, really quick. So totally think about doing something as a windbreak or a covering, or something to help knock down that wind penetrating those boxes. But just keep in mind that you want to keep an eye, I think, on the food stores and just make sure you have a place, either a zip where you can get in there and look and put something in, or you've got a shim, a place so you can put fondant or a candy board just in case, because that's the last thing in the world you want. Is we try to do what's right by the bees and give them all the opportunities to make it through. And then sometimes the thing that we do, it's just one little detail off, and we find it. Oh man, you know, I did all this, but yeah, I just
Right.
created every year you joke around and you see, I hope it's a joke, but you'll see the beginning beekeeper posts where they are literally wrapping their hives in saran and plastic wrap all the way around these
Oh
things,
yeah.
and then put them into a greenhouse and say we're
Yeah.
ready for winter. Like, you got to have a few of those
Yeah.
components. Um, and I think to go back to the gleanings from 60 years ago, they were saying the same thing that we're saying
Yeah.
now. You got to have a good, healthy queen, and
Right.
a queen, a late season queen is
Right.
fantastic. That's a huge thing. Now, they weren't struggling with the mites. You notice there was nothing about mites in the overwintering strategy from gleanings in 1959. But I think we can add to the queen quality and queen health. We can add to the overall bee health is definitely a must. They've got to have food. They've got to have the honey and the pollen inside of the colony. They got to have some ventilation, and things like a windbreak can really help cut down on the cold wind chill that can drop the overall outside temperature of the cluster. Yes, they keep the cluster warm. That's a constant rotation, a constant recycling and refreshing of bees. If there's too much stress on the outside of that box and those bees start peeling off, you start losing layers and layers to heat that cluster. You get into that situation that cluster is so small, it doesn't take a whole lot, and they eventually can, I think, freeze to death because there's not enough bees per cluster to actually keep them warm. So that's just something to think about. And then, like you mentioned earlier, the windbreaks, the wraps, insulation. Some folks will get into using foam board on the lids to cut down on condensation. They'll wrap the entire colonies in foam boards to help kind of buffer all those things. Nina, all that being said, is there anything that you'd like to add to good, solid, proven overwintering strategy for Ohio?
Well, sometimes I'm lazy and I don't get to wrap a couple of them, and then I'll come out and they've done real well. So
Yeah.
You know, no, it's just practice and just learning. It's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all. Just make sure. I'm big on ventilation.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate them. I have a black bee. I run a black line, and she goes into the winter real small. And last year, I kind of just gave up on her because I thought she was an older queen, and she was no bigger than a softball.
Yep.
And I quit feeding her, and I didn't wrap her, but she came through spring, and she's my biggest, strongest hive. So you just don't give up on them. They'll surprise you.
Especially those dark queens. Our
People don't
genetics are
understand that.
heavily
Yeah.
influenced on that Caucasian and
So are
those
mine.
Slovenian Caucasian,
Yeah.
and they we've joked around it before. You know, they're the
love
ones
'em.
that you're not. They're getting so small in the wintertime, and then as the
It
maples are
scares
blooming, you open the
Yeah.
lid and you're thinking, oh no, there's 2 or 3 seams of bees. They're not going to make it, and you close them up, you write them off, and
Yeah.
as you're coming back to take the box off the stand or off the pallet, you
You're
crack
like,
the lid,
wow.
and oh my God, I got to add another box.
Right.
They're so smart and in tune. We joke around and call them the Dave Ramsey of genetics because they're just frugal and smart with their resources.
Yeah.
They're living within their means, and then they just explode and everything's in place.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I've been running them about 5 years, and I
Yep.
will not sell a nuke to a new beekeeper, one of my black girls,
Yeah.
because they don't understand them. They don't appreciate them. They just want that Italian that's going to build up fast and eat you out of house and home, you know? And
Right.
they don't understand them. And that goes with experience too. As you become a better beekeeper, you learn which breed you like. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned feeding there. Brian, do you do any kind of supplemental feeding in the wintertime, late fall, winter, or early spring for the bees?
Yep. Yeah. So and that's one of the areas that I really changed up after I had all my losses. But I'll feed, early in the spring. I'll feed. I throw on the sugar syrup. I throw in the pollen patties. Here in the fall, I have feeders on mine, and this is the first time that I've gone to the Pro Suite, and they are just devouring it. I bought 20 gallons from you, got 4 buckets. 3 of those buckets are empty, and that's been,
oh my gosh.
What is that, Greg? It's been probably not even 2 weeks.
Not even 2 weeks.
They've taken 3 buckets. So when I go check here in a couple days, I'll top off. I'll be adding from the 4th bucket, but they're just devouring. And with that bucket, I'm going to add the Hive Alive liquid into it just to get that supplement, just to help with their gut health.
Yeah.
Through the winter time, and it's almost going to be, it's this is that tricky time of year, like you've said. I'm going to keep an eye, and when we get nights where it's going to get, we're going to have those freezes up here, I'm going to switch over to the fondant, and I have the Hive Alive fondant that I'm going to use.
Yep.
That worked really well. Last year I added it late in the season, but they took it. And the health of my colonies this year, and I've said it half a dozen or more times now already, I don't know if the health of my colonies is directly related to the use of the Hive Alive product, or whether it was just that we had that phenomenal year and we had, everything out there for them. But I'm going to keep doing what I did last year, and I'm going to, supplement them and keep going forward. If I have that same result next year, then that's when I can scratch my head a little bit and say, well, maybe 2 years in a row, maybe I'm onto something here.
It's a pattern.
But yeah, I will. And I probably, as far as adding that fondant, I would think it's probably going to be in the next month, maybe, but it just depends. I mean, I looked at the weather, and for next year we have temps in the mid 60s all week.
Yeah.
So
that's going to be a real problem. That's something for folks listening who are trying to put their plan together. It is not quite time. Actually, it's nowhere near the time to put them away for winter.
Yep.
Quite yet, especially when you see the robbing going on. there is no forage out there. We are absolutely huge fans of using ProSweet. We're mixing all of our totes with the Hive Alive syrup and giving that thymolated seaweed extract to every single colony to get their guts clean, healthy, give them just that little extra boost going into the wintertime so they can metabolize the feed that they are using throughout the wintertime. We're putting 1 to 3 gallons on every single colony to kind of run that through. And like you mentioned, Brian, we're putting those shims on and have Hive Alive fondant to be able to put on top of those colonies. We've been using dry sugar as a mountain camp for several years,
Yeah, I love
and that's worked out fine.
Yeah.
When we got up to the number of colonies that we have now, it's just too labor intensive. And so this year we're going to try and go all in with the Hive Alive fondant to give them that little extra nutritional boost with the thymol and see if that's going to help a little bit there. So Bruce, what are you guys doing down in Alabama to, I know you mentioned earlier there, you're just, you're feeding, you're staying on top. I'd imagine a part of your overwinter strategy in Alabama is to stay on top of feeding.
Yes, I just kind of check the weight. I don't go into every single colony and look and see, but I kind of lift up on the back of the colonies, just check and see how they weigh. And you can tell pretty quickly if they've lost weight and if they need to be fed. Last year, in I think it was February, I kind of got in a situation. My bees were looking great. I just doing really well. And one day I was up there and I had happened to order some Hive Alive after the Hive Alive conference. And I didn't have a lot of time. I was going through the colonies and I realized there was not a lick of food in these things. Like in a week or two, they went through everything. And I called my wife and the bees were super chippy and feisty and aggravated. And it was just, I said, can you bring me that fondant? It was just here at the house. And she brought it and I said, set it down by the creek. Don't bring it up here because the bees are mean. So she left it down probably 50, 60 yards away and I went down and got it. And I fed, like on the NUCS, I fed like a quarter of a fondant. I didn't have enough to do all my colonies that needed it. And so I think that saved my bees last year. And then we were kind of between flows. It was kind of in the early spring, late winter. And they came out of it okay and did fine. But I try to just kind of keep the weight on them. I like to get them pretty heavy, like right now. I like to have them heavy going into winter and then just kind of leave them alone and just kind of monitor the weight. Another thing, I had a question for Nina, actually. As far as the shims, the corks, tell me how you do that. I missed that part of it.
It's nothing fancy. I just have a 2-inch shim with a hole in the front. And then I'll make my mountain camp or I'll put my winter patties on top. And then I put my inner cover on. And then I just use the wine corks on the corners just to lift the lid up a little bit.
Lift the lid up. Okay.
Yeah, and it works for me. It gives me enough ventilation. And then I tarp them. And with that, and I slide my board underneath, I'll leave the front open just a little bit, just so it goes around the ventilation. And I've just been successful. I don't know if it's right, but
no, listen, if it works, it's right.
I'm running. I go through winter with probably 50, 55 hives. Last year I had 65. This year I think I've got 50, 52, and it's just me. Okay,
Sure.
and
It's a lot of work.
Well, it is. When you were saying that commercial, you have to be consistent because I'm pulling stuff off the old dead pile that I have that I want to burn, that I need. I mean, it's just terrible. But they're making it through the winter. Whatever I'm doing, it's working. My friends think I look like a hillbilly when I tarp them, but I don't care.
Whatever works.
Yeah, sure.
They're surviving.
I will say that here in Alabama, what happens, I think lots of times, and I know this is more of an Ohio-based show, but I think people watch beekeepers from up north, like Ohio or wherever, and they see you guys tarping them, and that's important, I think, up there to do that. But down here, it's never really cold enough to need that. I mean, like I say, if it gets in single digits, it's like the world's coldest year ever. It's, it almost never happens. And so people down here, you'll hear them like, I've got to go buy the tarp for my colony. They're trying to tarp their hives, or how do I prepare for winter? And down here, I think you can almost get in trouble if you do that because it almost can get too hot.
Yeah.
in
And
the wintertime. So you got to be careful.
yeah.
Understand, and I think a lot of people on this stream probably, maybe new beekeepers that may not understand that it is definitely different wherever you are.
It
And,
is.
the
It
point
is. And
so
and you're right. I listened to everybody as a new beekeeper when I started out. Tarp, tarp, tarp. And now I've got an old time beekeeper. He doesn't tarp and he runs over 200 hives. And he always tells me, they'll be okay, Nina, they'll be okay. And last year when I forgot to tarp some, he was right. They are okay.
well,
You know?
it's whatever, and it's just whatever you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes
Right.
that may help them build up faster in the spring, and so
Yeah.
it just depends on what you want to do. But it really down here, and my problem is I run all kinds of stuff. I don't have it down to a science like Greg and Brian do yet. I've got
Science.
I've got some
Wow.
pollination hives colonies on pallets. I've got some, I run some in 5-frame NUCS, some in 5-frame NUCS stacked up to 3 and 4 high. A lot of them in a deep and a medium 10-frame or double deep 10-frame. I've got a little bit of everything, but I think the key is that you have the right amount of space and weight for the population of bees in the colony. I have everything from some of Greg's Appalachian mutts all the way up to just feral mutts from around here, all the way up to just, purebred Carniolans or Italians that I've ordered from Jose or other people. So I've got all kinds of bees. And so I try to kind of assess each colony and just kind of see what's going on, make sure they have the space they need, not too much space, make sure they have the weight they need. Honestly, I anticipate some of Greg's this winter that we put in NUCS. They only have a couple frames of bees right now, but it's starting to cool down and we're going into a little bit of a dearth. And I anticipate them getting into pretty small clusters in the wintertime. But I also know from Carniolans in the past that I've had, they'll get down to a softball sized cluster.
Oh, yeah.
And then they blow up in the spring. And so that's what a lot of people get worried. And I get worried. Last year I had a colony that I put a Carniolan queen in late last summer. And I thought this colony is just going to die out. I knew better, but I thought, man, they're just not doing anything. And they ended up being one of my biggest within a 2-week period when they turned it on, they were in I couldn't stay ahead of them. And so that's just how they work. But it's mostly, once again, it's just like it is. You got to make sure they have the food. Down here, we have a pollen flow come in almost all year. Like in late in December and January, you'll see them bringing pollen in from something. But the nectar is where they really starve out, and pollen occasionally they will, but nectar is where the problem is. I guess there's a lot of flower sources that don't really produce nectar, but they must produce pollen. We have a lot of yellow mustard out here, which is wild mustard in the fields.
Oh, cool.
And I think that's probably a pretty good pollen source, but they just don't bring a lot of nectar in. That blooms all winter. So it's just it's totally different down here, but it's the same. Bee principles are the same. You just have to learn how to manage them wherever you're at and with the different colonies you have. But I do try to, I found that if you have a little ventilation, even if it's a crack in the lid, just a little bit. I don't usually run inner covers. I've never done that. Just don't really need them down here that I've ever needed. So if it's just a little bit of a crack, I think that really helps, like kind of like what Greg was talking about, just to allow a little bit to allow that moisture to be able to wick out instead of condensing on the bottom of the colony. So anyway, it's very interesting talking to people from different regions. And as part of this YouTube thing, we get the chance to do that quite often. But I know I've got some Alabama folks on here probably watching, some people in the South, and you really, I mean, you just don't need to, a lot of the things that you guys do up north, you just don't have to do down here. And I think most people understand that, but some don't. And then we do have concerns. Sometimes I told that Greg and Brian last year, sometimes it's in ways, I don't know if it's more difficult here, but it's just different because we just have to be vigilant all winter long. You can never put the bees to bed, so to speak. You have to be watching them all winter long.
Yeah, we can get off of our treadmill here in another week or two, but you're going to keep going.
Oh, yeah. I have to peek in on them. I have to lift up on them. And so it's just different, but it is fun. It's a challenge, but we can start splitting and doing things a lot sooner, too. Like we could be in them. We could be splitting in, at the latest mid-February. I mean, you can even start, at the latest mid to late February, March for sure. And if you can find cells, and if it's warm enough, you can start splitting even with cells early. But that's tough to find cells that early. But it's fun. It's a blast.
Cool.
Like I said, I'm trying to do a little bit of pollination is a whole different thing. You're going to send them out to California for pollination. You got to start feeding them and almost artificially stimulating them to grow. And so that's a whole different ball game too that makes it a little more challenging, but it's fun. I appreciate you guys letting me join you tonight. I didn't mean to really get involved, but it's been kind
Thanks
of
for
fun.
taking time. I hope you enjoyed the time with the family, and thanks for sharing with us about what winter and winterization looks like for you in Alabama. I know we're going to keep talking more about it as we get closer there. As we kind of wrap all this up, Nina, do you have any other final thoughts or anything you want to share with us before we sign off for the night?
No, I just want to say thank you. This was a really nice, fun event this evening. Just listening to different, especially Alabama, how different it is there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of
cool?
glad I'm in Ohio, so I don't have to work all year long.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
different. We slow down, but we never stop.
Yeah. No, this was great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Brian, you have any closing or final thoughts there?
No, the only one thing I want to, we've had a couple people ask about the Hive Alive, and I know the fondant is sold out on their website, but I know somebody that just got a pretty sizable shipment in. So, and I just looked on website and it's not there. So, for those that are interested in the fondant, what do you want them to do?
If you're local, if you're in Ohio, we just got a nice shipment of the brand new Hive Alive fondant, and it's brand new, beautiful packaging here at the farm now. So we have an entire shipment of that. It won't last long. So we've tried to not be explicitly vocal about that. But for all the folks that are in our area, we'll definitely take care of you. It's good. I'm looking forward to using it. I've got so much good feedback from guys like Bruce and Brian and other folks that I actually trust their input and using it. And so I trust what they have to say so much that we have completely moved away from using dry sugar this year to nothing but the Hive Alive fondant. For me, it's a convenience factor. It's already in a pack. It's already ready to go. It's an inverted sugar. It's already mixed. It has the seaweed. It has thymol. It has some essential oils in it. It has the things that are going to help give them that little bit of an edge as they work through that feed throughout the season. It's in a quick, convenient pack. I can quickly look in, see it, add another if they need it. And for that, if I have to spend, $10 or $12, maybe $15 for those for each colony, and if that's the thing that gets them through, that's money well spent. So for us, we're going to be using that on several hundred colonies as a way to just help buffer some of that. So that's what we're doing. I think we've already kind of gone and talked about what we're doing, but that's kind of our big change this year is switching to the fondant from Hive Alive. So Brian, thanks for reminding folks about that. If you are in Ohio, you want to stop by the farm and pick up some Hive Alive fondant. We have it at a great price. And if we can get around to it, we're going to get it on the website and start shipping it too. But for right now, we want to make sure we take care of all of our local folks first, get them everything that they need to be successful for the wintertime. I kind of kept it under my hat a little bit as we've talked about the learning yard and what we're trying to do for folks. If you're interested in learning more about the learning yard, you can go to our website at naturesimagefarm.com. Check out some more information there. The Learning Yard is just it's a bee ministry. It's an extension of us. It's a way that we can support those who have supported us by buying NUCS and packages. It's a way that we can offer the shop talk, the classroom type information there, take it right out to the bee yard and learn and see all those things hands-on. We can do it together. We have, like Nina was out this year, we're going to have all kinds of great folks out sharing their experience in beekeeping with all of our folks at the Learning Yard as well. It's not about me. It's not about what I do right or wrong. It's about sharing beekeeping with the beekeepers so they can all be successful. That's what the Learning Yard means to us. It's a fellowship. It's a ministry for beekeepers and their bees. So that's kind of what we're doing there. So I appreciate everyone tonight joining. I'm sorry I've been real bad about the comments here. I can't, Nina, I'm getting old. And I saw some photos a couple years ago where I was actually wearing my glasses. I just stopped wearing them thinking my eyes were going to magically get better. Guess what?
No,
They're not. And so I can't actually read the comments that are on that far away, so I'm going to have to probably do something about that. But it's
You're
not going to
like
get any better.
No, when I started wearing glasses at 40, all my girlfriends, they were too vain. Okay, I just put them on because I was blind and I'm better off. They still can't see. So
Nina, I just hit
put them on.
50, and in the last year, I had to get these, and I still
Yeah.
struggle wearing them.
You have to.
Still
50.
struggle.
I got 10 years to grow into them things, Brian.
Oh,
As long as I can see the graft, that's all I care about. And I can see that perfectly. I'm good. That's just
yeah.
trying to see that screen over there. It's like, not today.
It's
not
not
gonna do it.
pretty. I've been wearing them 20 years, but you know what? If you're blind, you're blind. Put them on.
Yeah. Well, hey Nina, thanks so much for
Thank
joining us
you.
tonight. You're
Thank you.
folks only just got a little. I mean, you're so great to spend time with and to work bees with. You're a wealth of knowledge. But what I love about you is you do it in a way that's non-confrontational. It's not your way or the highway. You just love bees and you love
Yeah.
teaching people about bees, and it is so clear when folks are around you. So I want to thank you for spending a little time
Thank
with us
you.
tonight, sharing some strategies for wintering bees up north here. Thanks again for joining us, Bruce,
Yeah.
Brian. Thanks again for hopping in and sharing what you guys do with your bees for everybody too. I want to thank everyone hanging out. A couple quick shout outs. I've been working with Matt and Sarah this week on some projects, so I want to shout them out. And then Aaron Romine stopped out today to pick up some things, so that was pretty cool. A lot of want to shout out to all the Ohio folks. Oh my gosh. Just quickly scrolling through here. We've got looks like Tim down there in Southwest Ohio. We've got Roy Adams, Jason Fout, some Castle Hives guy. We've got Drop Tine Buck, Chris. Let's see. We've got Tony. Is it Mount Castle? Tony Mount Castle. I'm going to go through there. I'm going to miss a bunch. I know I saw Wayne's Honeybees. We've got Jules Bees. She's in the house tonight too. Man, John Lawler. There's a bunch I probably already missed. Yeah, I'm gonna thank you guys. It's cool when we do all these things, and it definitely spans past just a state. And it's cool when you see your state showing up and supporting you. I think that's about it, guys. I think that's a wrap. You see what I did there, Brian?
That's a wrap.
I want to thank you guys again for watching. Thanks to Nina, Bruce, Brian, all the folks listening. As always, I want to remind you to be the lighthouse and be the change that you want to see in this world. We'll see you next time. Hit it, Brian.
Hey, Greg, you